My name is Shell Everett Martin. It's Martin. First name is just Shell. Although I became 6 years old in February of 1919, it wasn't until the fall of 1920 that I started to school in the four-room school at Spring Creek. Because my grandmother taught me to read books and papers before I ever started to school, I spent my first year in the four-room school in the first and second grade and did all the work in both grades, and moved to the other downstairs room where the third and fourth grade was held. And at the end of that second year in school at Spring Creek, I was promoted upstairs to the fifth grade. So I completed the 8 years of grade school, secondary schooling, in 6 years, and was eligible to go on to high school. Now, I've talked about the bridge, and it was there, and from the condition that the planking was in and the subsidence of the approaches, which my father and I worked on that fall yet, and then the following spring. And during the winter, also on the planking, we cut large beech trees at the back of the farm behind the back knoll, as we called that, and staked them out. My father took them somewhere to a sawmill then, and had them sawed into planks, and we replaced the planking. And in the spring of 1920 particularly, I can recall taking the reins, and my father with a scraper shovel, and I would drive the one horse we had, the gentlest. We would scoop up earth north of the roadway, I should say west of or upstream from the roadway, that goes from the bridge to the road on the Jackson place. And we also did it on both sides. It scraped up a lot of dirt and shoveled and raked it in and leveled it up. And then when we got the new planking, we put it down. And that planking was still there at the time that I last saw the bridge. And of course I realized it wouldn't be there now, but I did notice that the planking was not that bad when I was there and walked across it to see if there was anything left of the old farm, which as far as the buildings and all was not, when I was there in 1984 on the one trip that I'd made back since I left that area right after Christmas in 1931. I also know from Robert Jackson that the bridge, the iron steel bridge, was installed by his grandparents. As he told me in the early 20s, when he would come down to visit from for the day, on off day, from Jamestown to fish there in the creek. How he enjoyed, when he was a boy, coming to visit his grandparents, Jackson, when they were living and on the farm there. And also, when you looked at the such things as the doors to the music room that slid into the wall, and all the many things that were there when we first moved there, and all of the fancy surreys and buggies and everything that were in the one barn, in that one level where we stored that stuff. Apparently they had sold a lot of lumber and had a lot of money. So the bridge was put up in 1908, and that was original. as it says on the marking. Also, another thing, a question about the amount of money it took to build that bridge. I think that the Bob Jackson's grandparents probably ended up with quite a little money. I don't know where his father lived, if he was living at the time, that he would come down there to go fishing in the spring, particularly in Broken Straw Creek. But I did go fishing with him. I believe my mother wrote me and then addressed to me at Leon Mitchell's address to tell me that they had sold the farm, or really had traded it for a rental property in Erie, Pennsylvania, and gave me the address. So when I went home sometime in August, late August I recall, that's where I went to. Then my father was working, and he did not take the car. He rode with other men in the painting contractor's truck over to Meadville, I believe it was, where he worked on the college yet. But anyhow, he came home on Fridays and Saturdays, and so on Saturday he came home after I was up there. He wanted me to see the property that they traded for in Erie. And we drove up to Erie. Now, the story was that this was rented, but the people, he had not received any, should have received at the first of the month, a rent check from each one of them. And they were Polish people. So we drove up there. Well, the sides of this two-story, 2.5-story really, I think, building was totally empty. All the furniture that had been in both sides was gone. The people were gone. Nobody knew anything of what had happened. So that concerned my father, and we time we got back, it was late, and he had to rest up, as I recall. But maybe we did go down right then. But maybe I took his car and drove down to the farm, because he'd put in some crops and had the team and all this equipment. We had used a tractor on both farms that I gather was purchased by Dr. Iyer, and but we had used on both farms equipment such as a Massey Harris binder for harvesting and tying the sheaves, for shocking the grain, and all these things that my father bought. But anyhow, that place was totally deserted. Every bit of grain that had been in the granary, every bit of hay that had mounted anything had apparently been hauled away. Probably they'd come in. But anyhow, the fact of the matter was that this was a scam, and this Polish attorney who had come to see them and made the deal and handled the transfer of everything, apparently was in on it, because, of course, he took my father to Erie, showed to the property, and the fellow supposedly on one side, I believe, supposed to own it. Anyhow, they did a swap. So they took every piece of farming equipment, everything of any value, the team, the horses, the wagons, buggies, everything off of that place. It was totally stripped of our farm. Well, I don't remember what all happened. I think my father reported this to somebody, and we couldn't even locate the attorney, as I recall. But that led my mother to have me take the car then around Labor Day and go over and drive her over to see Robert Jackson in his law office, and that's the last time that I actually saw him in person. I remember him telling us that he was very sorry about he'd heard about another scam in New York, and he said, "You probably will never locate that fellow, nor will you locate the people, because they've been doing that on property, and of course there's so many Polish that came over after World War I, so they would buy something like this, set somebody up as the owner, and then wouldn't have, these people were supposed to be working the mills and had good jobs and all that. Then they would take and get a farm like that had a lot of equipment. Then they would haul that in the night away from that place into another state where they would have maybe a smaller farm or something where they put these people, and this was a way of taking care of the input to get people settled someplace where they could raise enough to eat and all that, as actually people who were escaping the developments that were going on in Poland and Germany and all at that time. All he could do was sympathize with my mother and said, "I doubt if you ever find it, you could spend all the money you have." So I would try to sell that property up there for what you can get out of it. Well, anyhow, this is what happened. I don't think they got too much, but somebody bought that. I have a record of that, and I don't know how much money, but they did sign over, there's a note that they signed over a deed on the property in Erie to someone. And, of course, they left the farm. And I don't know what happened. The next thing that I knew about the farm was that Bill Henry and his sister were living there when my brother then got back out of World War II and got started a business and got enough money. He finally went up there just to see what the place looked like where he grew up until he was, well, living at 31, of course. He would have been 6 or 7 years old. No, he would have been 3 and 1. Yeah, he would have been 8 years old by the time we left up there. So anyhow, that's the story of what happened and why we were so poor when we left there. And I suppose that they were defaulted and somebody repossessed the farm or something, and I know it was a Federal Land Bank mortgage, I believe. So from then on, I never did find out exactly. I asked my brother, but he never did find out, understand just where the title of the farm went and what happened. But I don't think they ever found out. And we did hear later of some of these scams being pulled, and they would be, they put a property in the name of someone, they house them there a short time, and then you look around to get someplace where they could go out and farm, because that's all that they were trained to do, with people coming in at that time. And I might say that my reason why I took a civil service exam out in Montana, I wrote to Bob Jackson after he became Solicitor General of the United States and before he went to the Supreme Court, because he was a big supporter in the area of Jamestown and all those counties over there when Roosevelt was running for president, and so he was appointed then as Solicitor General of the United States. I think during, if I remember correctly, during Roosevelt's first 4-year term. But I wrote to him then and asked him about the possibility of getting a job back in Washington with the government. And I maybe still have his letter someplace, but he wrote a long letter and advised me that he might get me a temporary job, but he said, the situation in Washington is, if you get an appointment to some job here, if the election changes and you have a new president come in, that job is no good at all, and you're out of a job again. And I would suggest that you take extension work, take college work at night, do all those things, which I did, and put in to take a civil service exam, and it used to be you'd have to go practically all day and answer an assembled examination that went into all the details of the type of job you were looking for, and I decided to go for an engineering technician, an assistant, which was a sub-professional job. I got into government that way, and I finally ended up at NASA as the man in charge of all the radiation protection and studies and everything that went on relating to the dangers of radioactive items being taken and launched from the spacecraft and on the moon and living there, and all detailed out the requirements for safety analyses and health analyses to be made on all of that for the manned spacecraft program, and became, without any real resident study, but I became professional engineer physicist, and mistakenly was called by many of the younger men that came in as Dr. Martin. However, I sure, as far as formal schooling for degree work, was far from having a doctorate in science. So that's about all I have to say at this time, and God bless you, and be good to you in the world as the world and the Lord has been to me. Goodbye.